received an email this week. Somebody raised a question about this idea of judgment, because we use the word and we use it to describe one of our faculties, faculty of judgment. And how do we think of judgment? Especially righteous judgment, which is the title of the talk, The Power of Righteous Judgment. I personally do not like the word righteous because it brings up feelings of righteousness. It's like a holier than thou attitude that we have. But the word's been explained to me many years ago as right use, righteous right use. You should think of it that way, the right use of judgment. And that makes sense. Maybe it's a stretch, but at least it fits my understanding. But I have a kind of a challenging time putting together a talk based on this idea because of some of the baggage I probably carry around. And I love the idea that, judgment is one of our faculties. It's not something that we ever stop doing, but we want to learn to do it correctly. And, we all exercise judgment all the time. And what it really is, judgment is a definition of something. It is a definition and a embracing something as our reality, whether that's true or not. We're judging, and we want to make sure that we are calling reality, that we're not calling an appearance reality. It's a challenge to move beyond our own thinking is really what it amounts to. In one way, it occurred to me early this morning, that a good way to frame this talk would be to think of the sponge. Think of a sponge that lives on the beach, and think of the sponge that lives in the ocean. You've got two completely different mindsets. If the sponge on the beach and the sponge in the ocean were to create religions, and the religion theme or the main thrust of the religion was to get back to the ocean, where we came from, get back to our home, the sponge on the beach would have a completely different view of what that meant. They would see themselves, that sponge would see itself as separate from the ocean. So it would be thinking from a paradigm of separation. The sponge in the ocean would realize that it is in the ocean is in it. It's one with the ocean. Now, we will assume that the sponge in the ocean, there are a few of them out there that forget their relationship with the ocean, because it's like the fish asking, where's the water? I've never seen it. Because it's so close to it, it doesn't recognize it. But the religion of the sponge in the ocean would be about awakening. It would be about waking up to the truth that you are now in the ocean and the ocean is in you. There's no separation. You don't have to get to the ocean. Whereas the sponge on the beach would be thinking in a very different way. So when you think of Christianity, you think of traditional Christianity, we are thinking from that point of view like the sponge on the beach. We're separate from our God. We're separate from our source. Something stands between where we are and where we want to be. And that something is, actually it's a physical body. And it's potentially our belief system. That we have to get things in order because, we may get back to the ocean, but we're not going to do it while we're in this body. So the mystic has the understanding of the sponge in the ocean. We are one with the ocean, and the ocean is one with us. There's no place where I leave off and the ocean begins, or vice versa. It's a whole different mindset. One is in the process of waking up. The other is aspiring to get to. So we think of the traditional view of the coming kingdom. It's something out there. It's going to be coming someday. and it could come any day, although after over 2,000 years, I'm not losing much sleep over when it's going to come anytime soon. The mystic says the kingdom is already here. The ocean is already here, and I'm immersed in it. And that my job, because there are a lot of sponges that don't realize, they intellectually grasp this idea that I'm in God and God is in me, but may not have an experience to support that yet. Doesn't mean that it won't come. So the whole religious approach to the mystic is waking up to what is true. It's as I have said with the parable of the lost coin. I'm recovering something that I already own, but I have misplaced. So we are now immersed in the full life and presence of God. We will never be any closer to God than we are right now, but we don't know that. And so our job is education. It's learning. It's learning how to have a direct experience that shows us the relationship of oneness with God. But it's two very different approaches. If you're the sponge on the beach, you're going to see life in a completely different way than if you're the sponge in the ocean. So where are you drawing your judgment from? That's how we want to frame this. If we put judgment in this sense, I think it'll be easier to get hold of, get a handle on it. So according to Jesus, the level of judgment we get is measured by the level we give. Just as a mirror reflects back the exact image we present, our quality of life mirrors our level of judgment, restricting our quality of life so to that same level, which is kind of what Diane's saying about this morning with the boomerang. We kind of get back what we put out. So the question here is, do we see ourselves as a sponge on the beach, or do we see ourselves as the sponge in the ocean? And I know the sponge is not a good analogy to apply to a person, because we don't normally, if somebody calls you a sponge, they're not making a compliment out of that. So we have to look past the analogy. I mean, put it in perspective. But the sponge on the beach has problems that the sponge in the ocean does not. It's got sun, it's got wind, it's got bipedal creatures who play on the beach and use you as a car wash. So there's a whole different set of problems for the one who thinks God is separate than to the one who acknowledges their oneness with God. It's a whole different approach. And the religion and judgment, all the stuff that we apply, can look very different. If you try to explain to the mainstream Christian these ideas, they will not get it at all, will not understand it. Beth had to run a couple of them off from the front door this week. And again, I always give them the benefit of the doubt, because obviously they can't read the no solicitation sign. So we have to kind of take that into account. But they will tell you that you have a whole set of problems I don't even think about, because I realize that I'm in the Father's in me. If the Father is greater, the ocean is greater. If I don't always realize that, that's a problem, but it's a problem I have at that moment. It's not a problem I have with God in terms of God's going to do something bad to me. The ones who believe they are separate from God now and are hoping to get in good standing with God have a chance of not making it. And that is a very different mindset than the one who realizes they already own the relationship of oneness with God. But it's a matter of finding it. It's a matter of reconnecting or connecting consciously. So it's a whole different approach. So one religious perspective is not going to even comprehend what the mystic is talking about. And most religions, in fact, I think all world religions are based on a paradigm of separation, the belief that humankind is separate from God. And the Jewish-based ones, as like Christianity, take that back to Adam and Eve, cast out of the Garden of Eden. We were cast out, and they were cast out, and we inherit their sin. We inherit their sinful nature. It's assumed that everyone that is born in sin and in need of salvation. The mystic would not even conceive of that idea, that we are born in love. We're born in the presence of God. Our whole life is an expression of that presence. The whole process of procreation and expression through the physical domain is still in the presence of God. The physical side is just another aspect. In my Father's house are many rooms. This is one of those rooms. But it's a big house. And it's a lot of room for understanding why we don't see where we are, why we don't grasp that we are now in the presence of God. That's why we sing it every Sunday. That's why we reaffirm it every Sunday, because it's so easy to forget. How many of you forgot this week that you were not in the presence of God? Don't raise your hands. But I'll say I did. I am guilty of that forgetfulness. And not that I go around consciously thinking I'm in the presence of God all the time. But when you pass a judgment where you drop down in a level of experience you don't really like, you have forgotten that you're in the presence of God. Because if you remember you're in the presence of God, you have a constant experience. The sponge in the ocean never has to worry about drying out. It's always in the ocean is always in the sponge always in the ocean. But we do forget, and we can act as if, the sponge in the ocean forgets it's part of the ocean. It thinks it's just a sponge. It knows there's something there, but it doesn't quite get what it is. I don't know exactly how sponges think, but I kind of know. So the question we ask is, our judgment expressing a strength, or is it protecting a weakness? If we are the sponge on the beach, we're always going to be protecting a weakness, the weakness being we're separate from God. And any judgment that we pass, somebody comes to your door, they want to save your soul, you don't buy their story, they feel that they or you have a problem, they make a judgment. And their judgment is based on the sponge living on the beach. It has nothing to do with the reality of the sponge living in the ocean. So they pass a judgment. They will pray for your soul. They will do whatever they need to do to fulfill their sense of duty. And I don't blame them for going out and trying to convert souls, because that's what they believe. What they're doing is going around telling sponges that live on the beach that, their true home is out in the ocean, and they'll get there someday if they adopt this way of thinking. If they don't, they may not make it. That's a judgment. It's a judgment based on an inaccurate perception. And that's really what this is about. We're talking about perception. We're talking about how we see things, how we evaluate. Because I don't feel the presence of God, I would develop the perception that I'm not in the presence of God. But that's not true. I'm always in the presence of God. I cannot escape the presence of God. I can only escape the perception of the presence of God. That's where we get in trouble. And we don't really get in trouble even. It's a judgment that is not accurate is the source of our present quality of life. You want to improve the quality of your life? Watch how you judge. Watch what you are calling reality. And look to see if there is a better approach than you're making at this present moment. Because the measure you give out is the measure you get back. that's what I want to emphasize, is the only person your judgment affects is you and me. My judgment affects me, yours, you. You can judge another person in a negative way, and we all do that. But what happens is we go down to that level of judgment that we make. That's our experience at that moment. And the question is, do I want to stay there? Do I want to keep that? And it's not a matter of erasing facts, because somebody could be acting very nastily, not behaving well at all, and we would pass a judgment on them for that. But it's the importance of this is that our strength is in seeing the wholeness in the person, even when we feel like they're not behaving properly in a way that might hurt themselves or somebody else. But our weakness is the belief that we're separate from our spiritual source, or that they are separate from their spiritual source. That's the weakness, and we will justify that in our minds. We're protecting that because that's where we're coming from. They are a sponge on the beach. I'm a sponge on the beach, and that's how we're going to deal with life. So the judgment puts me on the beach. It's my experience. It has nothing to do with them. No matter how I judge them, if they buy into my judgment, then they're making a judgment themselves, and they're dropping down to the level of that judgment. But the judgment from strength is to say, okay, here's the appearance. I'm a sponge in the ocean, and I don't see the ocean, but I know it's there. So to judge righteously is to what am I doing to block that experience, block that awareness? And that's where my work is. It's not in labeling somebody else or some situation as something I don't like, and I'll respond that way. It's why am I not seeing the wholeness of God in myself now or in the other person? So instead of reacting impulsively or with negativity, we strive to consider the bigger picture, recognizing everyone is on their own unique journey with their own challenges and circumstances, which we cannot possibly fully appreciate. And that's, again, not something that we necessarily carry with us as a quick go-to response, that you're just having this problem because you're having a bad day, you forgot your oneness with God or whatever. Often it's after the fact that we resume our educational process. We remember, why did I respond that way? I know better. Why did I see it that way when this is what I've learned, this is what I'm learning, that I am a sponge in the ocean. I can never be separate from that. The person I'm thinking about is the same. And yet I have run out on the beach and had this fight. As if that's true. Sponge on the beach is perception. There are scientists that are actually saying this whole earthly experience is a perceptual lie, perceptual error. And people that have the near-death experience say the same thing. Science and spirituality in this regard are touching, they're coming together. And it's, I'm not ready to say that I'm here and I'm having this physical experience and there are consequences to my choices. Sometimes the air conditioner goes off and it gets hot. And I acknowledge that. I don't say I can't be hot because I'm not really a body. I'm not hot. My soul is just fine. But I've got this thing I'm dragging around I call a physical body, and it's kind of hot. So, we don't want to deny that side of it. We have stepped into this experience, but we have not stepped out of the ocean. And that's the trick. That's what we're trying to remember, is just because we have stepped into this experience doesn't mean we're on the beach. It means we have forgotten we're in the ocean. How do I get back to that? I can protect the weakness of saying what I'm looking at is very real and my judgment is correct. Or we can look at it and say, there's something amiss in the way I'm seeing this. My awareness is not open. The aperture of my awareness is not open far enough. So I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, which means I forget, I get lost. You know, I think often about Jesus, what kind of consciousness he must have had, and our perception of that is, well, he was probably always living in the awareness of God. That's how I would have thought about him in the past. I'm not so sure about that, because he got angry, he got frightened. Read the account of the Garden of Gethsemane, where he prayed 3 times for the whole thing to change. And it's, he was going through a traumatic experience as you and I would. Very human. What was going through his mind when he was turning tables over in the temple? He wasn't tiptoeing through the tulips. He wasn't thinking lovingly, apparently. Said he made a whip of cords and beating the heck out of people. So that's a very human experience. He is portrayed as one who is always conscious of his Father. A single experience of the ocean, and you never forget it. You never forget that it's part of your makeup. And I think he had more than a single experience of that awareness. I think he had a steady diet of it. But I think he stepped out of it too. And I think that's just fine. My Savior is not really the man Jesus. It's my ability to shift perception, my ability to remember I live in the ocean. That's the thing that saved me. And to be able to move back into that awareness. And we all have that ability. We are the prodigal sons that run off into the far country and come home. That's the Savior, the home that doesn't change, and the Father that does nothing but love. That's the salvation. Jesus didn't take that parable and say, you must come back through the Christian church. You must come back through a certain way of thinking before I will let you come home. He threw all that out. And that's why I like to think of that parable as truly as the gospel of Jesus. We've all experienced someone's anger directed at us, not because of anything we did, but because their attention was elsewhere. Our judgment is influenced by the perceptions we project into our present experience, shaping our reaction in ways that diminish our quality of life. So if we're living our life thinking we're separate from God, that someday the kingdom's going to come and all that, we're going to look at people and things. We're going to try to modify our behavior. I'm going to try to be a better person so I can get to heaven. That's a judgment. That's a perception. I'm not a good enough person. I have to watch how I think, how I behave, so I can make it back into the ocean. But what if I'm in the ocean now? And I am. You see, we talk about omnipresence, and that's a difficult concept for us to grasp, because we, human beings in this body, we are so governed by time and space. In space, you have to go get in your car and go someplace. You got to go someplace because what you want is not here. It's there. And that's where our salvation has been placed as well. Our salvation is not here. It's there. And there will not be here until we're dead, until we leave this plane. And so there's no way that we can actually, we have the comfort of knowing, yes, I'm saved, but I still have, the devil around every corner trying to throw a wrench in my motor. So I'm always tempted, always there's that chance that I won't make it. It's a perception. And that perception is a false sense of reality. And any judgment I have, any judgment I make that is based on a false sense of reality is not a right judgment, not a righteous judgment. And so I, again, pull my awareness back. And how do I deal with the situation if I know that the presence of God is here fully and I'm in it? How do I back up and redo this thing? How do I rethink it? How do I refeel it? And it will be an intellectual exercise if we have not put our toe in the ocean, if we haven't had a conscious awareness of that, the omnipresence of God. Again, we don't grasp omnipresence, meaning everywhere equally at the same time. All the qualities of God are everywhere equally present at the same time, no matter where we are. Wherever I am, God is. You know, we close our service with that prayer, that affirmation. But we don't think that way. We think in time and space, terms of time and space. Space, God is somewhere else. Time, someday I'll be one with God. So that's a false perception. And any judgment I make based on that perception is a false judgment. And I make a lot of them. We do it time and time again, day in, day out. But we are on this path to wake up to a different way of experiencing, a different way of perceiving. And there's no place like the present to put that into play. I'm angry at somebody. That's a judgment. I'm angry because they did this or they did that. They have the ability to make me angry. That is a false perception. It is a perception. It is a definition of my reality. They have the ability to make me angry, so I'm going to be angry. And I'm going to respond in anger. Is that true, or is it a perception that can be changed? If I am in the presence of God right now, then that means all that I could ever want to experience at the soul level is here. But I've closed the door. I've closed something in myself that does not let me have that experience. That's my judgment. So judgment is my experience. My judgment becomes my experience, becomes the level of my experience. The measure you judge, the measure you give out is the measure you get back. That means it happens instantly. It's an instant karma, instant process. Not karma, I don't like that word. But it's an instant experience that I'm seeing in part when the whole ocean is right here. Do I want to try to see the whole ocean, or am I okay with being engulfed in my judgment? And usually we are, because it's so normal to us. It's such a normal reaction that we don't really think about another way to look at it. But, and that doesn't mean that we don't call people on, certain things, that we don't call ourselves on certain things. We all have times when we don't perform so well and we don't respond so well. But Jesus recognized the significance of exercising judgment. He compared it to fishermen gathering different types of fish in their nets, separating the valuable ones from the undesired ones. If the fishermen didn't make a judgment, they'll be burdened with unnecessary fish. So I like that picture. They throw a net out in the ocean, they pull it back full of fish, they keep some, they throw others away. That's a judgment. And the criteria is, what is a good fish and what is a bad fish? I've pointed this out before. If you own a pet store, you'll have one reference. If you own a restaurant, you'll have another. I don't want a catfish swimming around in my aquarium necessarily, but I'll eat one. But I don't want to eat a goldfish either. But I'll let them swim in my aquarium. So it's a different criteria. What do you want? That's really what it comes down to. So every situation we're confronted with, we have the opportunity to pass judgment, to make a judgment. Is that a good fish or a bad fish? What kind of fish do we want? If I make a judgment, this person's done something to hurt me, I latched on to a bad fish because I will be hurt by that person's whatever it is they did, or how I perceive whatever they did. And that's a judgment, and that creates my quality of life at that very moment. So if you think of that as Jesus didn't say, get rid of your judgment. He said, judge righteously. What's your standard? What kind of fish do you want to keep? You don't eliminate the faculty of judgment. You eliminate the way you're using it, or you change the way you're using it. And we do that by acknowledging how this works. Because just watch next time you have a negative reaction to somebody, how you feel about it. How do you feel about your negative reaction? How does your negative reaction make you feel? And it's never good. It never feels good. Every time I have one, I wish I was above that. And I can be above that. I have been above that. I have sometimes transcended it, and sometimes I've let it take me under. But that's the human side. They say when we leave the body, we don't have that problem. And I wish somebody would come up with a system where you can have a body and not have that problem. Because, but what we do is we take on this body and we think this is what we are. And so we start defining territories, we start defining ways of life that are good and ways of life that are not so good based on the body. But we're here, and this is what we're trying to learn. This is what we're trying to see. We're somehow trying to make this earthly experience a good one. And one of the things that makes earthly experience a bad experience is our perceptions, our false perceptions. Because there are people that will see the same thing we're looking at, we're having a negative reaction, and they are not. It tells us it's not the thing, it's the perception. And so we're trying to learn how to bring the perception into alignment with the fact that we're in the ocean is in us. Not an easy thing to do. Instead of fish, we're working with ideas. Does our judgment enhance or diminish our quality of life? Our choice is not dependent on people or external conditions, external situations. Now, you're not going to believe that. I don't always believe it, because I think people do have the ability to make me angry or make me flustered or make me fearful. I believe that, but is that true, or is it a perception? So that's what I have to come back to every time I fall into one of these things. If I am going to be a student of truth, a student of these ideas, then it's my duty to start looking at the fish I've got in my net and deciding which ones I'm going to keep. And that net has been thrown 2 seconds ago and been hauled in. So it's a now moment. It's happening now, in this now moment. And that's why it's so difficult, because we live in time and space. Our perception of reality involves time and space. And in truth, there is no time and space. But we've got a body that sure thinks there is. And so we have to deal with that side of it. That's our vehicle. As we discussed last week, judging righteously means finding and returning to the steady state of our soul. But instead of criticizing ourselves for making unfair judgments, we actively work toward returning to our stable core. As I've been talking here today, I would imagine all of you, including myself, have listened to what's coming out of my mouth and have passed judgment on ourselves. I wasn't so good in that situation. I didn't do so well. I could probably do better. And so we're kind of heaping on ourselves something that's unnecessary. That's the value of learning that now is the only time we have, that the net is being cast out now. If I'm casting a net and there's a fish in there that says, you did wrong and you should feel bad about that. grab hold of that fish and toss it. We don't want that fish. But that's how close it is to us. It's happening in this now moment. That's where our judgment is being passed, and that's where our quality of life is being determined, by the judgment we pass. Aligning our judgments with our center of power contributes to a more harmonious experience. It is an ongoing practice that requires self-awareness, self-reflection, and a commitment to personal growth. By using our judgment in a righteous manner, in a right manner, we move more toward the inner peace we desire, and we contribute to the greater good of others. Okay, I painted a pretty broad picture here, and one that none of us are going to go out and immediately grab onto. But the reason we do this kind of thing, the reason we come together like this and talk about these things is so maybe one of the ideas will stick. Maybe we'll get something that we remember that we apply to a situation we're in now. And we're not going to just take this human consciousness and erase it and, get out of the habits that we spend a lifetime in. They say the only time we're really able to do that is when we step out of the body. And I don't want to keep saying that as a looking forward to that time, because we always come back to this idea, I'm here, I've got a body, I'm in this situation, how do I make it better? That's really the big question. How do I use my judgment to make it better? And so if there's even one thing that has come out of this that you responded to, take that one thing home, because I've done what's called the shotgun approach. There's a lot of pellets out there, and it's just one is all you need to get value from this kind of talk. Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. To subscribe to this channel, simply click our logo. Thanks again for your interest in independent unity, and have a wonderful week.